Today's speaker is Jessie Garcia, who teaches journalism at 2 universities in Milwaukee. She has been covering Wisconsin athletes and Olympians since 1992. First at WISC TV and then at WTMJ TV in Milwaukee. She was one of the first women in the country to host an NFL coaches show and serve as the Green Bay Packers sideline reporter. She is with us today to talk about her book, Going for Wisconsin Gold, Stories of Our State Olympians. I'd like to mention that copies of Jessie's book will be for sale immediately after our luncheon at the back table, and she will be available to sign those copies. Our thanks to the Wisconsin Historical Press, who will donate the proceeds for the book sales today to the Madison Rotary Foundation. We look forward to your presentation, Jessie, and we've made a contribution to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund as a way of saying thank you. As we welcome Jessie to the podium, I want to remind you that if time permits, we will have questions at the end. So please welcome Jessie Garcia.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and it's just a pleasure to be here. It's always wonderful to come back to Madison. This is my hometown. I went to Madison East High School. Very proud. Fur Golders, yes. And in 1992, I did become the Wisconsin's first female sports anchor. So thank you. It's kind of, I'll just briefly talk about my first 2 books, and then we're going to talk about my 3rd book here more in detail. But let me just pull this out. So my first book, which came out in 2013, is actually a memoir about being Wisconsin's first female sports anchor. And it involves being a woman. It involves juggling children. I have 2 boys who are 17 and 13 now. And it's also behind the scenes with the Packers, Badgers, Brewers, Bucks, Olympians, et cetera, that I covered for all these years as a sportscaster in both Madison and Milwaukee. There are something like 40 photos in this book, and I'm just going to show you one of them because this is my favorite. This sort of epitomizes my life. And really what a lot of the book is about, too. So I know you probably can't see this real well, but right here, this is Lambeau Field, and that is the tunnel at Lambeau Field where players come from the locker room out onto the field. And this right here, that is me changing my son's diaper in the tunnel at Lambeau Field. He was 2 months old, and I was technically still on maternity leave, but it was one of those things where they said, "We need you at Lambeau Field. We're taping this show. You have to be there." I didn't have a babysitter, so he came with me. And honestly, I was just looking for a quiet place to change his diaper. But one of the crew members thought it was pretty funny and snapped a photo of me in the tunnel at Lambeau. And so that has made it in the book. Now that boy is 17 and just loves having his photo immortalized in a book. So that was my first book, and you'll find it's just chock full of all kinds of anecdotes and stories and what it's like to cover 3 Super Bowls and all the different things that we did. And sideline reporting, there's a whole chapter on the locker room. People ask me that all the time, et cetera. Chapter on Brett Favre and Mike McCarthy, Mike Holmgren, et cetera. My second book then, which came out in 2015, is called No Stone Unturned, A Brother and Sister's Incredible Journey Through the Olympics and Cancer. These are all nonfiction. This is with Casey Fitzrandolph, who's a Verona native and speed skater and won a gold medal in the 2002 games in Salt Lake City, and his sister. So then not long after he won his gold medal, his sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she had been a great athlete, too, and might have been a wonderful speed skater. Some people called her the next Bonnie Blair. And so it's about their highs and lows. So that was my second book. And then my 3rd book, which just came out this past summer, is Going for Wisconsin Gold, Stories of Our State Olympians. And I had so much fun writing this book. I have just been passionate about the Olympics for a very long time. So to get a chance to actually sit down and write about our Wisconsin Olympians, and we have such a rich history. When I started doing research on this book, I discovered that we have about 450 athletes with Wisconsin connections in the Olympics, starting with 1900. So 1896, those were our first modern Olympics. And we didn't have any Wisconsinites in that one. It was very small, just getting going. 1900, though, we had our very first Wisconsinite, and then we went all the way up through 2014, the most recent Winter Olympics, and profiled as many Olympians as we could. Obviously not 450. We couldn't talk about everybody. But we did, in this book, you'll find a really rich history of the Olympics as well. So you're learning about the Olympics as you're learning about Wisconsinites and how they were involved in it. So let me show you a few of our Wisconsinites that I learned about. So, I'm going to advance this. And one more time. There we go. Okay, this is Wisconsin's first Olympian from 1900, Milwaukee's Alvin Krenz. He grew up on the east side of Milwaukee, went to the old, now defunct East Side High School. And Alvin Krenz actually had a bit of a tough upbringing personally. His father abandoned the family and moved to Fargo, North Dakota, and never came back. He was raised mostly by his older brother and his sister. He was a great track athlete. He went to UW-Madison just for a couple of years, though, because he was so good, he was lured away by the premier track coach at the time, Mike Murphy, who was at the University of Pennsylvania. And the two of them really innovated so many things for track and field. And this was one thing that I was stunned to find out about our Wisconsin Olympians. Alvin Krenz invented the modern hurdling technique. So he is known as the father of modern hurdling. So prior to that, believe it or not, this was 1900, and prior to his invention, people would run up to a hurdle, they would stop, and they would hop over the hurdle. Both legs tucked up behind them. As you can imagine, it was pretty cumbersome. And they weren't going very fast. And then Alvin and his coach, Mike Murphy, came along, and they invented the technique of putting one leg forward and one trailing leg tucked behind you, where you can stay in stride. And he went to the 1900 Games in Paris, and he won 4 gold medals. Go figure. But I'm actually stunned that his name is not known more than it is, because he is still, to this day, the only track and field athlete to win 4 gold medals in one Olympics in all individual events. So Jesse Owens, Carl Lewis, they won one of theirs in a relay. Alvin Krenz won all 4 of his in individual events, and yet his name is very much lost to history. So he was our first one. He was also involved in a major Olympic scandal, really the first Olympic scandal. I won't give it away. It's all in here. Well, I have to tease something. But I will say that it involved coming to blows with a teammate, a Team USA teammate, on the day of a competition. So that was really fascinating to find. And we tracked down Alvin's granddaughter, who is in her late 70s. She lives in Pennsylvania, and she had never been to Wisconsin before. And I was so thrilled when she agreed to come here for the launch event that we had this summer, that also Nancy Hayden was at. And I was so honored to have Nancy Hayden there, as you heard, mother of Eric and Beth Hayden, great Olympians, and of course they're in the book as well. And to have Alvin Krenzline's granddaughter here and to show her around, we went to the Old Red Gym, Bascom Hill, Science Hall. I took her to Milwaukee. We found the exact spot where her grandfather had grown up in Milwaukee, which unfortunately is part of the Marquette interchange now. But we could see the exact spot where it was. So it was just great. As we move on, here's another one of our great Wisconsin Olympians that I learned about in researching this book. This is 1904 now, and this is Oscar Osthoff. And if the name Osthoff sounds familiar to you, maybe you've heard of the Osthoff Resort, right, in Elkhart Lake. His parents started the Osthoff Resort because his mother needed to convalesce. She was having a tough time after the birth of several children, and the doctor said to go to a quiet area. So his father, who owned a hotel in Milwaukee, bought this land up in Elkhart Lake and started the Osthoff Resort. Oscar was a bellboy, and he would carry the bags from the train up to people's rooms. And perhaps that is where he started with his athletic prowess, because he went on to be an Olympic weightlifter and to win several medals in 1904. And again, I was able to track down Oscar's grandson and great-grandson, who still live in Wisconsin, and talk with them and get their memorabilia and their photos. This book is also chock full of photos never seen before and other types of memorabilia. So that was a lot of fun. Then we go to, also in 1904, Wisconsin is the home of the first African-American medalist in history. And this is George Polk, and he is from La Crosse. He had been born in Missouri, but his family moved to La Crosse where his father and several siblings passed away from diphtheria and some of the horrible diseases they had at the time. So his mother took George and his one remaining sibling, and she became the housekeeper for a very wealthy family in La Crosse. This family opened up their home and their library. Very unusual for the times. They encouraged a love of learning. It's said that they may have helped pay the way for George Polk to go to UW-Madison. He became the Big Ten's first black track and field champion. And then he went to the 1904 games, same as Oscar Osthoff, which were held in St. Louis as part of the World's Fair. And he won 2 bronze medals and became the first African-American medalist in history, and Wisconsin is proud to have him. His story was a little bit lost to history because he had no direct descendants. He never married and never had any children. Some historians from La Crosse just brought his story back to life within the last couple of years, and there is now a park, George C. Polk Park, in La Crosse, that was just dedicated this past summer in his honor. As we move on to a little bit more, well, we're moving up the timeline here of the century. This is 1936, and these are what were known as the Hitler Games. And in researching this book, we wanted to point out some specific Olympics, and this was one of them because it was such a significant moment in time. Nobody knew that the next 2 Olympics would be canceled because of World War II, and Hitler was just rising to power. These Olympics were held in Berlin. And in researching that, we found a Wisconsinite who was right in the center of it, Ralph Metcalfe, who went to Marquette University. If that name sounds familiar at all to you, he became a politician in Illinois. The Metcalfe Federal Building is named after him. There's a Metcalfe Park neighborhood in Milwaukee. Several schools are named after him in both Milwaukee and Chicago. Great scholar, amazing man. And he ran in, well, he went to 2 Olympics. This was his second. He ran in several races with Jesse Owens. He and Jesse were very good friends, lifelong friends. And Jesse often said that Ralph Metcalfe was a better runner than him, and he was surprised that Jesse would beat him. So this is the 4x100 relay, and we're going to watch a little YouTube clip of this. It's in German, which just makes it all the more interesting, I think. And you will see that Jesse Owens is the first leg, and then our Wisconsinite, Ralph Metcalfe, is the second leg. And just take a look here and watch this video.
4x100 Meter Staffel, Männer. In die Entscheidung sind gekommen Argentinien, Deutschland, Holland, Amerika, Italien, Kanada. Owens, der schnellste Mann der Welt, der erste in Amerikas Staffel, geht spielend in Führung. Vorbei am Italiener Mariani. Erster Wechsel. Metcalfe hat den Stab. Steigert vorbei an Hamburg, Kanada. Gibt im zweiten Wechsel an Draper. Und Draper fliegt davon. Schon ist er weit voraus. Eine gewaltige Kurvenfahrt vergrößert den Abstand. Dritter Wechsel. Letzter Wechsel mit Frankie Weikow. Er rast dem Sieg entgegen. Erster Amerika, die neue Weltrekordzeit von 39,8. Weiter Italien, dritter Deutschland. Der Holländer Osendarp hat an dritter Stelle liegend den Stab verloren.
Yes. So as you can see, that was quite an interesting moment, and really just blew away Hitler's idea that the Germans were going to come in and just dominate every single race. Also, that particular race involved another major Olympic controversy, which is all in here. So, but there's so many interesting tidbits to the Olympics because there's so many human beings involved, and human beings are pretty fascinating creatures. So that was one of the best parts about doing this book, was just learning and finding out. And again, I interviewed Ralph Metcalfe's son. We tried to track down descendants of Olympians or Olympians themselves if we could. As we get towards more modern times, here is an Olympian that we talked to directly, and this is Dan Jansen. Dan Jansen, of course, another one of Wisconsin's great Olympians. And I'm just going to play this. It's actually a Visa commercial, but it sums up Dan Jansen's story in a 60-second nutshell, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about Dan, if you want to play this one. Thank you.
Hours before his race in '88, Dan Jansen's sister, Jane, passed away. He'd promised her he'd win gold. He didn't. Until 6 years later. Then he skated a victory lap with his daughter, Jane. Visa, the only card accepted at the Olympic Games. More people go with Visa.
It gets me choked up every single time, and I've seen it hundreds of times. It's an amazing, amazing story. And by the way, little Jane, who you saw there in his arms, is now a senior, I believe, at least a junior or senior at Clemson University. So she has grown up quite a bit too. But Dan Jansen, so I contacted him, and he and Bonnie Blair, Eric Hayden, I mean, we're talking the nicest people in the world. Wisconsin athletes are just known for being really nice people too. So Dan, who lives in North Carolina, said, sure, I'll be happy to be part of your book. I won't be back until Thanksgiving. So I waited until Thanksgiving, and then he met me at the Pettit Center near Milwaukee, and we sat for hours upon hours, and I interviewed him about his whole story. And, you know, what you saw there from the Visa commercials, kind of like the outside of the apple. And I wanted to dig in more and find out, you know, who is Jane? I have heard all these years about his sister Jane, but who is she, and what was their relationship like, and what was it like when she first became ill, et cetera, and what was he thinking and feeling during all of these moments at the Olympics? So those are the types of things that I tried to put in the book. Well, I also wanted to talk about, now I'm going to actually ask you to play this one, Jane, because it's long, so play it while I'm talking, and I'll talk it over. Can we adjust the volume a little too? Okay, great. So I'm just going to have this play just in the interest of time here while I'm talking. But I wanted to get into competition itself as well. So the meat of the competition. Why did people win? Why did they not win? This book is not all filled with winners. Many people in this book might have had their worst performance in their life, or it just didn't work out for them. So this is an example of one of the things that I wanted to dig deeper into the actual competition. This was 2008 in Beijing, and this is widely considered the greatest swimming race in the history of swimming now. So this was the 4x100 relay. And you'll see the second man from the right. Oops, well, they just switched pictures there. But our Wisconsinite is Garrett WeberGale, who's from Fox Point, Wisconsin. And he's swimming in the relay with Michael Phelps, who was going for 8 golds in that particular Olympics, and then with 2 other Team USA swimmers. And they were going, it was going to be a race pretty much between the United States and France, who you see here. And the French had been doing some trash talking and talking about how they were going to beat the Americans so badly, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody believed that the Americans were going to win this race because the French were a very strong team, and they just didn't think that the Americans were going to be able to do this. Now, I'm going to give it away just a little bit here as we're watching. They are just going to be able to outtouch the French at the end by what is less than the length of a fingernail. It was the most incredible race, and there was an underwater camera at the end as well that Sports Illustrated had set up. And the next week they ran a photo of the fingernail, the fingers reaching out, and you can see how incredibly close it is when Jason Lezak, who's the anchor leg, reaches out and touches the wall. So Phelps is the first swimmer who's going to go in the pool, and then Garrett WeberGale is the second swimmer who goes in, and then the 2 others. You can see all the cameras that are there. President George Bush.
According to my watch.
So as they get going here, I talked to Garrett WeberGale, who was back in Wisconsin visiting. He lives in Texas, but when he came back, he sat with me, and I interviewed him for hours. And I wanted to hear all about this race. So his thoughts and feelings and emotions leading up to it, which were fascinating to me. What he thought when he went in the water, which he had never done a relay start with Michael Phelps before, amazingly. They'd never even practiced it, which kind of blows me away. And he had to do a relay start with Phelps coming up here. So they each go the length of the pool and back. Now, Australia's in the lead on this first leg, and that was expected. They knew that Australia had a very strong first leg swimmer. So they knew it was going to come down to the final 3 legs. All right, so you're going to see Garrett WeberGale jump into the pool here shortly. He's trying to time it so that he jumps in to give the U.S. the best advantage without false starting. He was so close to false starting. It was hundredths of a second. And when he jumped in the water, his first thought was that he had false started. And he thought to himself, I just ruined the U.S.'s chances. But he also can't hear anything when you're in the water like that, and you just have to keep going. So he just keeps swimming, not knowing if he's false started or not. And he gets the United States into the lead.
By 3 or 4 seconds, that's how good all these
Now, Jane, when we get near the end, I'm going to ask you to pause it for a second because I want to show you the secret. I want to show everybody the secret that Garrett taught me. And I had never heard this before. In watching this race so many times, I had never heard anybody describe what actually happened from the athlete's perspective. Okay, our third swimmer goes in now, Cullen Jones. Considered the slowest leg of the four. And as you're going to see, he loses the lead.
Four-man event.
So it's all going to come down to Jason Lezak against Alain Bernard from France in the final leg.
Fastest relay split in history in the prelims.
And when we get to that point, I'm going to pause it for a second because I'm going to show you the trick that Garrett taught me about why Alain Bernard messed up this race for France. And Jason Lezak was able to win.
Over the United States. Alain Bernard awaits as the anchor guy, and Jason Lezak is going to have to make up some ground on Alain Bernard, who stands 6'5" and can absolutely fly. I just don't think they can do it, Dan. I mean, Jason Lezak.
You can hear the announcer saying, I just don't think they can do it. Because they're so far behind. In swimming terms, this is really far behind.
He's trying to ride that wave as much as possible. Bernard is pulling away from him.
So remember, it's lane 4 and 5.
The world record is absolutely going to be shattered here. The United States trying to hang out a second.
Okay, so Jane, get ready to pause.
Australia is in bronze territory right now, but
hopefully it'll
closing a little bit.
not go to black at that moment.
Can the veteran chase him down and pull off a shocker here?
Okay, can you pause it right there, Jane? Okay, here's the secret. You see lane 4 and you see lane 5, correct? You see where the French swimmer is swimming. He's too close to the lane marker. So what Garrett told me is that Jason Lezak, being the veteran swimmer that he is, recognized that and was able to swim close to his lane marker to draft on him. And in that way, he's able to get just that edge, that little bit of speed that's going to propel him to victory. What Garrett said is if Alain Bernard had just swum closer to the middle or to the other lane marker, there's no way that Lezak would have been able to draft on him and get that extra oomph and win. So if you could play it from here.
Depth, and he's tightening up. Bernard is losing some ground. Here comes Lezak. Unbelievable at the end. He's done it. The U.S. has done it. He did it. He did it. He did it. Phelps alive.
So that was Phelps and Garrett WeberGale celebrating. And he described this entire scene, what it was like. You know, he described it as he has amnesia from it. He was just in such a joyful moment there. He can barely even remember what happened in these final moments. And then he talked us through the whole medal ceremony and everything that happened afterwards, the ESPY awards and everything that they did. They even, there are the French swimmers, stunned. I know. And a conversation he had with some of the other French swimmers later where they said, oh, that kid Bernard, because he was a young guy and he hadn't swum an anchor leg before. And so it was a mistake. It was a swimming mistake. So those are the types of things, too, that I wanted to put in the book. So hopefully it is chock full of all of these types of details for everybody that you won't find in other Olympic books. I didn't want this to be a you-rah-rah book. This was a book that's about real life and real Olympians and, as human beings, what it took to get there, and also afterwards, the post-Olympic. I'm a little bit fascinated by what post-Olympic life is like and how you transition into post-Olympic life and out of the spotlight. So I wanted to really focus on that with all of the athletes as well. Of course, you will hear from Bonnie Blair, who invited me to her living room, and we sat for hours and talked, and with many of our other great female Wisconsin Olympians as well. We wanted to make sure that this book covered all parts of the state, different genders, different sports, et cetera, and different years. So we tried really hard to do a huge cross-section. There's the first, 1998 was the first female hockey team winning the gold medal, and we have a great Wisconsinite in here from there, Karin Bai, and Connie Carpenter-Finney, who's a Madison native, who went to 2 Olympics in both speed skating and then also in cycling, same with Chris Whitty. So all of those things are in the book. You will also learn a lot about just the Olympics, as I said. So for instance, why are the rings the colors they are? Why are there 5 rings, etc.? Hey, we have an Olympic flag right here from Kim Santiago's husband. All right. The Olympics get me so excited, if you can't tell, every time. So I had so much fun writing this book. The Miracle on Ice, I was watching all these wonderful old YouTube clips and listening to all these radio stories about the Miracle on Ice and thinking, this is the greatest job on earth, writing about things like this. So that is the book, and I'm very proud of it and very excited to share it with all of you. So I just wanted to leave the last few minutes for any questions that anybody might have for me on any of the books or the Olympics or my background, anything you'd like to ask at all.
What sport has Wisconsin participated in the most in the Olympics?
That's a good question. People, I would say it's speed skating, and that's because of the Pettit Center. And prior to that, the outdoor Olympic oval. But, I've had people say to me, we must have more Winter Olympians than Summer Olympians, correct? And it's actually not correct. We have more Summer Olympians than Winter Olympians because the Winter Olympics did not start until 1924. And the Summer Olympics, it started in 1896. So you had all of those Olympics where there were only the Summer Olympians. And then, we have every year track and field, swimming, rowing. We have a wonderful tradition of rowing here in Wisconsin and send UW rowers almost every single time. And gymnasts and all kinds of things. So just by a slight edge, we have more Summer Olympians, but I would guess in another Olympics or two that might switch to having more Winter Olympians. But overall, it would be speed skaters.
Hi, Jessie. I'm over here.
Oh, hi.
Martha Bukalik-Austin. Nice to see you. Followed you in your career.
Thank you.
And this is great. I just want to call out Nancy Hayden because growing up with Eric and Beth, she could drive to here to Milwaukee when it was outside with her eyes closed, I think. So I think the value of a parent can never be underestimated. Your books are wonderful. You are just a wonderful writer. What's the next project?
Well, thank you for all of that, and thank you for asking. I have been secretly writing a book about my children for 4 years. They didn't know this. The idea came to me on election day 2008, 2012, when Obama was elected for a second time, and the idea just popped into my head, and so I started paying attention to conversations I was having and things that were happening with my children. So my older one was then in 8th grade. Now he's a senior in high school. And I started chronicling, and every few months just going in and writing about all of the changes that he was going through and his younger brother was going through, and from a mother's perspective, et cetera. Now, here's the thing. I'm not sure they're going to allow me to publish this book. I was going to give it to him as a graduation gift, and then over Christmas break, for some reason, it felt like the timing was right, and I dropped the bombshell on them that I've been writing this book about them for 4 years, and they said, well, read it out loud to us. So I read it out loud to them over break, and we had a great time revisiting all these old memories, but my older son did say, you're not publishing this, because it has a lot of, things. He's a teen, and driver's license and girls and, all of this fun stuff. So it may just wind up being a little memoir for him. Maybe if, in some years he'll allow me to publish it, but not until then. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I'm open to other ideas for projects. I love sports. I love history. I'm passionate about nonfiction. So I'm always looking for things like that. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, Jess, I'd be remiss if I didn't say hi. I'm Rich Leppian, Chairman of the Board of the United States Curling Association.
Oh, wonderful.
And we just inducted a two-time Olympian, Lori Munford, into our Hall of Fame about 3 weeks ago.
Yep.
I'm wondering your take on curling, on the sport. Our induction only 12 years as a medal sport, 4 years earlier as an exhibition sport.
Yep.
So your take on curling.
I love curling.
Thank you.
I've tried curling several times, and it is way harder than you would ever imagine. And it's also really, really fun. Curling is, if you don't know, sort of like shuffleboard on ice, where you do the stones down and you have the sweepers. It is really, really a cool sport. And Wisconsin is the headquarters for USA Curling, located in Stevens Point. So we're very, very proud of that as well. And curling, I don't think gets its just due because it is so much fun. And there's this whole bonspiel and this whole attitude of everybody hangs around and has a beer afterwards. And it's really a fun sport for families, for friends, etc. So if you're ever looking for a great sport, check out curling. And we are very blessed in Wisconsin to have a number of curling clubs. A lot of states don't. So thank you for saying hello, and I appreciate that. And I do love curling.
Thinking about the 2016 Olympics,
Yes.
how would you approach writing about that?
The 2016 Olympics, I wish we could have included them in here, but the book was coming out 2 days before the Olympics in 2016. But Gwen Jorgensen, for instance, who is a triathlete and won a gold medal this year, I would love to have been able to include her in here. So I would be happy to publish an update every few years on this book and just keep adding to our Wisconsin Olympians. We do have a database that we are keeping track of every single Wisconsin Olympian. So every Olympics, my assistant and I will be adding to that database so that we know how many Olympians we have, what sports, et cetera. So yeah, 2016 Olympics were obviously, everybody was worried going in about Rio. Turned out to be just fine in the end. I think it would have been fascinating to cover, to go to. I would love to be able to see an Olympics, held in South America like that. And from a Wisconsin standpoint, definitely we have some Olympians that deserve to be in the next version of the book. So I think that's all the time we have for now, but I am happy to talk with anybody afterwards, and I'll be right outside at the table, and I'd be happy to personalize a book if you're interested in any of the books. And I just really want to thank you for your time and attention today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Jessie. Our meeting is adjourned.